Koach. Shekochachen. Good job. Very impressive that in harmony and at once you both could pronounce the word vila'aluvat. I mean, I'm sure that took practice. You have a good tutor. I know her.
So do you.
Todd, you're my tutor. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you to everybody who participated, all the Torah readers. Gail, thank you, leading and reading Torah. Chelsea, great job. Uncle Jesse, Todd. Of course, Layla and Harper. So we heard two wonderful drashot on our Parsha today from our Benot Mitzvah, Harper and Layla. And so I thought I'd talk about a more general Jewish topic, an easy, non-controversial one. Politics. Let me begin with two headlines from our local J Weekly Jewish magazine that jumped out at me this week. One is that a recent poll found that 72% of Jewish voters disapprove of Trump's performance so far. I read that and thought to myself, did someone really need to spend money on a poll for that? I could have told them that. They just needed to ask me. And second was that an Israeli think tank used AI to see how much American rabbis talk about politics in their sermons. And they found American rabbis talk much more about politics than they expected. And once again, I thought, they could have just asked me. I could have told them that. So today I want to talk about the relationship between politics and Judaism and why I think rabbis should not speak much about politics from the Bima, and maybe not at all. And I'm going to do that in just under 2 hours, don't worry. First, I have to say that a lot of what we think about as politics today involve questions Judaism just never anticipated or had to confront before. And therefore, if we're honest, we have to say that Judaism doesn't really have an opinion or position about much of our political world. It doesn't know from AI, from internet privacy or TikTok and DEI, and on and on. There's no Masechet in the Talmud on nuclear proliferation, or pretty much anything having to do with geopolitics. Second is that if we do want to say that Judaism has an opinion on contemporary politics, then we would have to say that Judaism is either all politics or none of it is. What do I mean by that? And here I have to make a distinction between Judaism and Christianity. Actually, Judaism is much more similar to Islam on this. That is, Judaism's core and origin, in it there's no distinction between the divinity of religious law, criminal law, and civil law. The Torah equally gives laws about theft as it does about sacrifices to God, about prayer, about festival observances, about laws of business and murder. In other words, the Torah doesn't distinguish between civil law, tort law, and what we might call spiritual law. They are in origin the same. Christianity, however, draws a line between these. You may even know this quote from the Gospel of Mark. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. And that's why the separation between church and state is a gift given to the world by Christianity, not by Judaism and Jews. Why does Christianity make this division? Well, we have to remember that Christianity arose in an already formed Roman Empire, where there was an already established civil regime. And maybe that's why Christianity mostly focuses on the internal, the personal, faith, and the spiritual, because external rules of society were already established in Roman courts. Judaism was a societal way of life of the desert from an earlier time where there wasn't a civilizational divide between religion and politics. Judaism predates categories of race, religion, and politics. We're simply a tribal family. The Jews were supposed to go into the land of Israel and set up a whole society. So in some ways, in Judaism, everything is politics. There's nothing that's not Torah, whether it's theft or paying minimum wage or whatever. Therefore, unless you have a Jewish state, not the current state of Israel, because it's not entirely built upon Torah principles alone, it's also democratic, unless you have a real Jewish state, you can then argue that nothing is a Jewish political principle, because it only applies when you're living in a truly Torah-driven state. And so, therefore, you could argue either Judaism is all politics or none of it is. With that background on politics and Judaism, one of the things that makes people on the left uncomfortable is that most people who are well-versed in Torah, more observant, tend to be on the political right. Therefore, for Jews on the left to say it's not Jewish to be on the right politically, you have a real difficult hurdle to overcome, because these are people who study Torah and observe every day. For people on the right, there's also a hurdle to overcome, because those who enact what we might call the mandate of the prophets, when Jews speak society-wide to both Jews and to the world and make real-world impact on a larger universal level, which is what Judaism is supposed to do, those people tend to be on the political left. So both sides have their merits, Jewishly speaking. And therefore, one of the things we have to come to terms with is that in modern times, is that almost nothing transcends politics. And that's in good part because common cultural space has evaporated. Nobody watches the same shows, reads the same books, listens to the same podcasts. It's all become balkanized. The only thing we all have in common today is politics. And so politics has rushed in and taken up all this space and has occupied our common questions that other things used to do. So I know, and you know, that if I, for example, talk about politics from the pulpit or on social media, it will get more reaction than if I simply talk about Judaism. And because politics is so all-consuming and also so divisive and tribalized, people may overlook things that they'd never overlook in any other domain. For example, the character of our current president. You would think that especially people on the right, religious people, socially conservative people, evangelicals, would never be able to overlook some of what he's said and done, but they do. It becomes much less important because their supreme allegiance politically outweighs that specific feature. On the left, you would think you couldn't possibly support. First of all, there's serious questions about attitudes towards Israel, and there's also just other political positions you would struggle to find Jewish support. For example, some say that it is a certified Jewish position that abortion on demand is a Jewish principle. I have to tell you that you can scour the Jewish sources up and down and you will never find a mandate for abortion on demand. The best you can do is say that it is permissible for the sake of the health of the mother, and yes, you can make it about the mental health, the well-being of the mother, but you can't go so far as to say abortion is permissible because of the inconvenience of the mother. Nowhere will you find that in Jewish sources. So on both sides, there are things that are inconsistent with the perspective of the Torah, and we overlook them because, Well, first of all, no one likes cognitive dissonance. And second, because what has happened in our world is that when you question your own side, it isn't only that you give the other side more ammunition and talking points, but it's like you've betrayed your team. Your friends will get angry with you, they'll cancel you. And that is really hard because America has more or less divided itself into teams. So one of the most important things to take from the lessons of the Torah is that self-criticism is the most important criticism. The people who we venerate were not the ones who merely criticized other people, but criticized their own people. The important thing isn't that they yelled at the Ammonites or the Chizzites, it's that they yelled at the Israelites. And I despair at the fact that so many only complain about how the other side is terrible and can't look at their own side. That's not the prophetic spirit. The prophetic spirit is to say what your side is getting wrong, not the other. So what are Jewish political principles and how do they play out? Here's a principle. All human beings are created in the image of God. That is bedrock Torah politics and Torah outlook. Compassion for the widow, orphan, stranger, and vulnerable, bedrock of the Torah. But how those principles of humanity in the image of God and compassion get enacted is automatically complicated. Consider immigration. When there were Jewish towns and people wanted to come into the town, the rabbis had to decide, how many do we let in? What can we afford? How will this affect the character of the town? And as you may know, as an historical anecdote, when the German Jews, who had been in the United States much longer than Eastern European Jews, and they saw an influx of Russian and Polish Jews come into the US in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it's not like they welcomed them with open arms. They didn't want them coming to America, and that was Jews to Jews. So our job is to craft a political position using Torah values, but to also be intellectually honest enough to recognize that there are also Jewish sources that don't support what I'm saying, whether it's policies on capital punishment, or minimum wage, or environmentalism, and on and on. And this is the reason that I avoid, as much as I can, preaching politics from the Bima. And I don't think that rabbis, or congregants for that matter, should preach politics from the Bima, because it makes synagogues either Republican or Democrat. And if the rabbi takes a constant political position, people who don't share those politics don't feel welcome. It won't be a true Beit Knesset, a true house of gathering. It'll be a house of Republicans or a house of Democrats, and that is not good for the Jewish people. We have to bind ourselves to something more eternal and bigger than which party we support. There are simply different ways that people view the same reality. And frankly, politics is informed more from someone's upbringing than what they know of Judaism or their Jewish education. Just remember that the dominant political model in the Jewish tradition is the kingship model. Democracy, even though you can find it in Jewish sources, and the Hebrew Bible certainly has some valence around democratic ideals, that was not what Moses was told to establish in the land of Israel. God did not say to him, checks and balances, Moshe. That's what we need, checks and balances. As a final thought, the great question that encapsulates the Jewish political divide, and I alluded to it earlier, is particularism versus universalism. The problem with the most serious Jewish outreach to the world is that most of the people that do it aren't seriously Jewishly committed or seriously Jewish educated. And the counter problem is that most people who are seriously Jewish committed and seriously Jewish educated don't reach out to the world. In the public sphere, the problem is that people who don't really know what Judaism or teaches or don't represent it in serious ways will make declarations about what's Jewish or not, or will use the shallow preamble as a Jew. But the flip side is that the people who tend to know Judaism really well and live it consistently tend to be more insular. At the end of the day, the litmus test as to whether your political position is actually a Jewish position is this. If you were not a believing Jew, would you take the political position you have? Because if you would take that position no matter whether you were a Jew or not, then it's not a Jewish political position. And yes, some people will say to me, yeah, Rabbi, but Torah and Judaism informs my values, and therefore you can't separate my political position from my Judaism. I get that. I do. But if I'm honest, I don't buy it. Most of our political positions come from developmental moments as children, informed by our parents' values and background, the kind of information, opinions, and environment, often the place in which we grew up, and has nothing specifically to do with our Judaism. Our political development, like so many other things in our lives, is deeply rooted in our childhood experiences. And I think about this a lot, as so many children are having their political foundation formed in today's time. If there are any fundamental Torah principles that inform our politics, I want to suggest the following. 1, the world is superintended by a loving God in whose ways we're supposed to emulate. 2, nobody is less than anyone else. We are all infinitely equal, as we are all children of God, no matter race, ethnicity, religion, and social status. And 3, what we have here is the blessing of God's grace. We're supposed to earn as much as we can, not materially, but in terms of goodness. And you do that by giving goodness with the acknowledgement that everything we have is a gift. The combination of our gratitude for what we have and respect for the other is the most important foundational value of all Jewish political positions. And the most obvious manifestation of this in the political arena, both in person and online, is 100% how we speak to each other and how we speak about each other. So I want to bless you and bless me, bless each and every one of us to take the gift that we are afforded in our amazing country, which is the gift of voting and speaking out, and to also always be as much critical of our own side as we are of the others, and to never dehumanize those with whom we disagree. Shabbat shalom. And now I invite back Layla